Frank Ocean revolutionized the music industry in 2016 with the debacle he pulled on then record label Def Jam, finessing them out of a rumored $20 million. In the process, he publicly made a fool out of all-powerful corporate executives backed by teams of lawyers, and more importantly, proved to the world that the route of the independent artist was not only possible, but necessary for the longevity of your career. Besides, in the new age of social media that was upon him at the time, connecting with and monetizing from your fans was never more accessible. Record labels didn't seem to be all that necessary anymore. And while on the surface, Frank Ocean's story appears to have a happy ending, enlightening artists of the game they have contractually entered themselves into so they can finally play the cards in their favor for once, it may have actually worsened their odds. For record labels and corporations alike didn't like to lose, and will do anything to recapture what they feel they are owed. While many die-hard Frank Ocean fans are currently turning on him for his abysmal performance and frankly lack thereof in the second week of the recent 2023 Coachella Festival, he once had quite possibly the strongest cult fan base in contemporary music. All the while, his discography only consists of 2 official albums, the last of which released over half a decade ago. But his story is much deeper than that. Christopher Francis Ocean, officially born Christopher Edwin Breaux, began his journey in the music industry in 2006 when he moved back to Los Angeles to pursue his music career. He supported himself by working at various fast food and service jobs while he awaited his opportunity to make it big. It would take only 3 years for Frank Ocean to be noticed by multi-platinum producer Christopher "Tricky" Stewart, responsible for mega hits like Rihanna's Umbrella and Beyonce's Single Ladies, signing him as a solo artist soon after in 2009. Although at the time, he would be listed under the alias Lonnie Breaux, a nickname given to him by his deceased grandfather, primarily as a songwriter contributing to lyrics behind prominent A-list artists such as Justin Bieber, the very same Beyonce, John Legend, and more. However, despite Lonnie's successful songwriting placements and promises of backing for 2 albums, Def Jam was unmotivated in helping him launch his own solo career. He found himself shelved, common terminology in the music industry for artists essentially stuck in limbo due to labels' unwillingness to provide a recording budget, and therefore the artists not able to complete their stated number of contractually obligated albums. And in these cases, the label's apprehension isn't always totally misplaced, for it is a known fact that it is much easier and more profitable, most of the time at least, to promote music from already established brands rather than risking hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions to jumpstart an unknown name. And Lonnie was making a good living from his current position as a songwriter. But he wanted more. 1 year later, Lonnie would find support in other musical artists and creatives within Tyler the Creator-led collective Odd Future. He first appeared in Tyler's She music video from studio album Goblin, released in 2011, and accompanied the group in their performance that year at Coachella before their first East Coast tour. However, earlier that year, in February of 2011, inspired by his new friends at Odd Future and growing frustrations with his label not backing him, Lonnie decided to release his own independent album, distributed for free via solely social media posts on his Tumblr called Nostalgia Ultra, since Def Jam showed no interest in assisting him anyway, except under a new artist name, Frank Ocean. A name inspired by the culmination of Frank Sinatra and Danny Ocean, a character from 1960s film Ocean's 11, infamously known for pulling off extravagant heists and somehow always getting away from it unscathed. How ironic. He would eventually legally change his name to Francis Ocean. The already buzzing Odd Future collective blasted Frank Ocean's new project to their cult following, who took a particularly strong liking to his music, especially the track Novocaine that had fans begging for an official release. In turn, finally forcing Def Jam's hand in recognizing Frank Ocean's potential as a solo artist. In fact, a few months later, in May of 2011, his label would release Novocaine on iTunes as a single to later become his first platinum record. They also announced plans to officially re-release Nostalgia Ultra as an EP the next month, but canceled in order to work on a completely new project. Undoubtedly, Lonnie Breaux's evolution to Frank Ocean would mark a new beginning for his career, but also a new motivation for revenge against his label. for only believing in him when it was profitable for them. Now that Frank Ocean finally had the support from his label and a newfound buzz in the upcoming internet age of music, it only took 1 year to roll out his debut album, Channel Orange, to quickly achieve critical acclaim. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 200 albums chart and sold 131,000 copies in its first week. Soon after, it was nominated for the Grammy Awards Album of the Year and even won Best Urban Contemporary Album in 2013, including one of its singles, Thinking About You, also receiving a nomination for Record of the Year. He was also named as one of the world's most influential people in Time magazine's 2013 issue. Frank Ocean's movement was undeniable, dominating the mainstream with his unique sound that traversed genres, and due to the album's immense success, foretelling an easy return on investment for the label, Def Jam awarded him another $2 million budget for his next album. But at this point, Frank Ocean had a bad taste in his mouth from how he was treated before the fame. He had proved himself time and again with the successful records he wrote for A-list artists, and Def Jam still paid him no mind for any of his solo endeavors. And now that he built his own career completely on his own, now they want to get involved to take a cut? Frank Ocean had other plans. After the release of Channel Orange, Frank Ocean was only contractually obligated to release one more album under Def Jam. But given how early he signed the 2-album deal in his career prior to gaining much recognition with his solo work, he likely had a fairly low, but industry standard, share in his earnings, especially after receiving a $2 million advance for the next project that essentially acts as a loan that needs to be recouped before collecting a more favorable percentage of his royalties. And even after the recoupment, a majority of the split still goes to the label. And need I mention how little backing Def Jam gave him at the beginning to help launch his career to the heights it has reached? They were practically making all the money without doing anything. But as aforementioned, Frank Ocean had an ace up his sleeve. Following Channel Orange's release in 2012, Frank Ocean vanished from the public eye in a 4-year hiatus, meanwhile only building more anticipation within his fanbase eagerly awaiting his sophomore album. 4 years seems like a long time, especially within today's music landscape of releasing at least one album per year to maintain relevance, but he had something special in the works. In April of 2015, Frank Ocean announced via Tumblr, I got two versions, which would explain the long wait. He was releasing 2 projects. The social media post also included a magazine issue titled Boys Don't Cry in the photograph, as well as hashtag July 2015 in the caption, indicating a possible album title and release date. Unfortunately for fans though, it would take another year until July 2016 for the master plan to finally commence. Early that month, fans would discover a digital copy of a library card labeled the very same Boys Don't Cry possible album title, including a myriad of past due dates, such as the original July 2015 date that never truly amounted to anything. However, at the bottom, the final date with the exact day of the month crossed out hinted that it was finally time. His brother corroborated the speculation by posting the picture on Instagram with a caption of hashtag July 2016. Although once again, July came and went in silence. All of a sudden on August 1st around 3 a.m., Frank Ocean would appear in a live stream shot in negative light on his website boysdon'tcry.com, sponsored by Apple Music in the corner of the video, seemingly building a staircase out of wooden blocks in a Brooklyn warehouse that spanned over 140 hours, sporadically playing instrumentals believed to be on the upcoming album. Fans speculated that each block represented a respective song on the album's tracklist that he was building, given the timing of the instrumental loops. But still no album on official platforms like Spotify or Apple Music. Even the label was puzzled by this rollout. All according to his plan. Later that month, on August 19th, 2016, Frank Ocean returned to his warehouse to livestream once again. However, this time, streaming exclusively on Apple Music to officially release his 45-minute purely visual album titled Endless, similar in format to an extended music video. None of the tracks were released individually in typical album format where you can scroll through the project and play specific songs on demand. You had to watch the entirety of and/or scroll through the almost hour-long video to play the desired song. Needless to say, this choice of release was awful and performed poorly for the long term. Not only was it inconvenient for the listener, but also the audience base was severely limited, only accessible to Apple Music subscribers, which was still a rather new streaming platform at the time. The fans and label were in disarray of such a disorganized rollout. It had to be a joke. No way was Frank Ocean going to recoup this $2 million advance from the label for years to come to fulfill his contract and finally be free. Or was there something we didn't know? For behind the scenes, Frank Ocean had been planning what seemed to be a 7-year game of chess, without Def Jam even knowing what they got themselves into. Prior to the album's release, he negotiated a deal with Apple Music for an entirely exclusive visual album rumored to be worth roughly $20 million, which he then utilized a small portion of, $2 million, to pay back Def Jam's advance and contractually free himself from the last album in their 2-album recording contract, meanwhile leaving them with scraps considering the abysmal reach of the endless album release. The very next day, on August 20th, Frank Ocean would finally get his payback against the label and a proper share of his music's earnings by revealing the real 17-track album he wanted to showcase to the world, titled Blonde, accompanied by a music video for the track Nike a few hours beforehand, all distributed through his own independent label, Boys Don't Cry, meaning that he now owned a majority stake in his royalties, more specifically 70%, as opposed to the measly 17% he was locked into with all of his Def Jam releases. Not only was the deal more favorable financially for him, but Blonde would also end up outperforming his last couple of projects, debuting as the #1 album in 7 countries, including the US, selling 275,000 units in his first week. His devious plan somehow extracted all the resources of a major label recording and marketing budget while finessing all the ownership. Truly an evil genius. And while Frank Ocean's ultimate $20 million money heist from Def Jam and Universal appears to be a positive moment in music industry history, shedding light on the brutal business dealings labels lock artists into, it actually had severe implications.
He had a deal and he didn't put out an album in 4 years. And with his deal, he literally figured out how to get 20 million from Lucien Grange, drop his deal, figure out how to make the funds apply to a whole nother album, give him a bullshit album, get out his deal all in one round. Do you know how embarrassed the record industry was? Do you know how hard they've been whipping artists since then? Like, this is some real slave. Like, you feel me? Like, that man figured out how to finesse the record industry, and people don't talk about that.
The record labels were embarrassed, to say the least. Frank Ocean's scheme would be a permanent blemish in their balance sheet and industry history as a whole. A billion-dollar corporation couldn't let an artist beat them at their own game. But with Frank Ocean's disappearance after the album for another half a decade, they had to bide their time until the right opportunity. For the meantime, though, record labels added further clauses into their contracts to safeguard themselves from this type of situation ever happening to them again, banning outright all exclusive deals with Apple and other streaming platforms, allowing them less leeway for artists to gain leverage over the label when negotiating record deals. Although, in hindsight, just the mere fact that Frank Ocean proved that labels weren't all powerful and had weaknesses was enough for more aspiring independent artists to rise against them. When the aftermath settled, Tricky Stewart, the producer that originally signed Frank Ocean to Def Jam, later admitted that he and the label should have treated him better and gave him the respect that he deserved. In 2019, Frank Ocean would sign a new deal with Warner Chappell, likely a more favorable deal than the first, given his newfound leverage and knowledge of the industry. His final thoughts on what transpired explained, "I feel at peace with all of that. I feel like the best outcome for myself was that outcome, and I feel proud of what I was able to get done with it. I love the music and the art that came out of that period, as well as the visual work. It's definitely a period I look back on fondly. With major music companies, you're going to be deflowered. Anytime you get into the business side of the arts, there has to be some degree of objectification or commodification that you're comfortable with, of yourself and of your work. Shedding light on how artists get so caught up in the fairy tales of fame, money, and glory that labels promise them, not realizing that many of the time they are easily taken advantage of. The lore behind Frank Ocean's Blonde album has already become legend and paved the way for rising artists to take control of their own careers. Hopefully, the backlash he experienced at Coachella this year wasn't the beginning of the industry's vengeance.